Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming out to the Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural National Historic Site for our monthly speaker series. I'm Patricia Zarpa. I'm the Public Programming Coordinator for the site, and it's a thrill to have Cornell IRL back again and coordinating a program with you this month. And we enjoy it thoroughly. We really are. It's an honor to have you back. Our speaker series is talks about relevant issues in our world today. Surprisingly, as I was speaking to others earlier, the same issues that we deal with today in our community are very much the same issues that Theodore Roosevelt dealt with during his presidency. A lot of things don't change, and we make them better. We continue to try to make them better, but they're always going to be there. And I know that Dr. Warner's presentation tonight is going to cover a number of those issues that are relevant today, relevant back then, and it should be very, very interesting. And I know I'm looking forward to hearing it. Just want to mention that after the program, after the presentation, questions and answers. So feel free to, jump in with questions and answers. And then after that, we have some refreshments right in the room behind us, just past the elevator. There'll be some light refreshments that everyone can partake in. I also just want to remind everybody we have a couple of other programs coming up. One tomorrow for anyone who enjoys historical novels. We've got Jeff Shaar coming into town. He just wrote a book on Theodore Roosevelt. It's a historical novel called The Old Lion. He'll be in tomorrow evening to do a talk on his new book and do book signings. And so Talking Leaves Bookstore will be here. They help coordinate with us with the many, many issues of books that will be sold that night and signed. And then next month in July will be a program by the Western New York Land Conservancy / the Riverline on an update on the Riverline program by Jeff Lebsack, who I understand is now a supervisor for Cornell, and that's exciting. So we will have that on the 25th. So at the refreshment table, you'll see some flyers for these programs. I think that is about it, because I want to introduce Kathy Creighton from Cornell ILR, who's going to introduce Dr. Warner for this evening's program. Kathy?
I want to thank Tricia and the TR site for having us again this year. This is really fun for us, and to come with students to this very special place where Teddy Roosevelt became president of the United States. And I want to thank Kelly Shear here for from the Cornell Club of Buffalo. I encourage all you students to join your Cornell clubs when you graduate. They're super fun and hold great events. So thanks, Kelly. Good to see you. And finally, I'm thrilled to introduce Professor Mildred Warner to the Teddy Roosevelt Inaugural Site as our 2003 Cornell speaker. Professor Warner, welcome to Buffalo, and she brought with her her husband Jim, who's in the back. Jim, so great. Thank you for coming. We did more than a 3-hour tour of Buffalo this afternoon, and I think it impressed Jim and Mildred, and also showed them the challenges and the promises that Western New York and Buffalo face. Dr. Mildred Warner is a professor at Cornell University School of Architecture, Art, and Planning. She works in the Department of Regional and Urban Planning, and we have 2 High Road Fellows here today who are in that school. She is an international expert on local government service and how local governments can promote economic development and environmental sustainability, and how we can do that in a just and equitable way. Professor Warner leads Cornell University's Local Government Restructuring Lab, which is designed to provide local governments with information on restructuring trends and innovation in public sector services, and help with the many challenges that local government faces. And I know that my husband has used those resources that Dr. Warner provides in his work as a state elected official. If I was to tell you about everything that Mildred Warner does and all her accomplishments, we'd be here all night and we wouldn't be able to hear from Mildred. But I do want to say a few things more. She was born and raised in Alabama and Georgia. She's been married to Jim for these last several decades, and they have 2 children, Eleanor and Charles. They live on a farm 9 miles from Ithaca. She teaches a number of classes. She mentors many students, including many PhD students. She writes books. She writes hundreds of articles, yet she still finds time to drop what she's doing to help colleagues and elected officials and people around the state, around the country, and around the world to offer practical advice which is clear and understandable and able to be implemented. Dr. Warner's research challenges gender bias paradigms in economic development and planning, and she works directly with local governments. She encourages cities to address the needs of women and children and families and older adults. And she articulates the role of human services as a social infrastructure for economic development. I'm going to just repeat that sentence because these things kind of go over your head sometimes, but it's super important and it's really kind of revolutionary. She articulates the role of human services as social infrastructure and necessary for economic development. I'm still at the tip of the iceberg of what Mildred does and what she works on. She works on rural and urban differences, rural development, the impacts of privatization on local government, tax caps, tax subsidies. She's also extensively published on comparing local governments in Canada, Ecuador, Honduras, the UK, Netherlands, Spain, and China. And she's just returned from Ecuador, where she maintains her 40-plus year relationship with those she met during her Peace Corps days. I first met Mildred when we were working on when I was working on a project and asked for her advice. Lou Jean and I were working on a project with Steve now. I saw him walk in. There you are, Steve. On childcare, and Mildred was really wonderful to deal with and offer her many years of experience and expertise in childcare. Mildred, we're joined here today with people from the Buffalo community and also with our High Road Fellows. They perform work similar to what you perform, which is community engaged learning, working with community to promote a better community for all of us. And you are a high roader through and through. And for that, we welcome, we welcome Mildred Warner.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for that very kind introduction. And hey, wow, I'm happy to be an honorary High Road Fellow. I wish I could spend the summer working with you in the community groups that you're working with, because I find that I learn the most when I'm working with community. And sometimes people ask me, you know, your research, it's a little bit different than like the standard that you're seeing in the journals. It's like, yeah, because I engage with community, and community teaches me the right questions to ask, challenges me when I work on things that they don't think are relevant, and sort of help me be a better scholar. And so Cornell has a cooperative extension system that was created back in 2013, so it's 110 years old now. And in the old days, they used to have a byline helping you put knowledge to work, which was kind of paternalistic, like knowledge comes from the university and goes out to you. That's not their byline anymore. It's more of learning together, and the community affecting what we do as research, and then what we do as research maybe actually also informing practice. A lot of scholars spend their time telling you what's wrong with the world and don't tell you how to fix it. In planning, we try to figure out what's wrong and why, that might then give us clues on what we can do about it. And I think the ILR school has that same action orientation of trying to understand the world and then do something to make it a better place. And that's what's kept me in the academy. If I was only describing what was wrong and writing articles about it, that would be boring and depressing. And instead, I want to look in a more positive way. So when I was putting together this talk, I was thinking, well, let's take local leadership. Do we have local leaders here? Anybody raise their hand? Yeah, we have the head of the community foundation. That's a local leader. How about future local leaders? All right, that's where we're headed. And I was thinking of some of the big challenges facing the world today, like climate change, like aging. And you'll say, aging, what are you talking about? We are entering a time unknown to the world before, where we're going to have more older adults as a percentage of the population worldwide than we've ever had before. And how does this make us rethink retirement? Are you really getting ready to start that next career? And how we think about, we used to talk about a population pyramid, having a whole bunch of young people and very little old people. Well, the population pyramid is starting to look like this. It's not a pyramid anymore. And how does that cause us to rethink our cities, to rethink our social policies, to rethink our economic development policy? And actually, how does this, just like climate change is this huge change that we don't quite understand all the implications of, aging is another huge change. And if there's anything that COVID-19 taught us, it's about time we started paying attention to equity. Because we can't have a sustainable society if we don't. So what I thought I would do today was take these three challenges of environment, demography, and economy and say, well, we need a comprehensive approach, and maybe local government can take some leadership here. Sometimes we see leadership at the state level, sometimes we see it at the national level, but when we're in periods when we do not see leadership at higher levels of government, oftentimes you will see local leaders go ahead and move. And that's why I find local government interesting, because it moves. And local government might not just be the government, it might also be civic groups, business leaders, but people grounded in place who want to see some kind of change. So what I've had the pleasure of doing for the last 30 years at Cornell is working on what I call local government restructuring, whether it's the economy that's restructuring, or state-local relationships and fiscal stress, or the aging of the society, or the need to address gender issues, or what's happening with the environment and sustainability policy. If local government works on it, Mildred likes to study it. And so I can remember back when I was 18, I got my hands on a college catalog, and I'm looking through it, seeing all these courses I could take, and I had this dream. Wouldn't it be fun to go to school for the rest of my life? I'd like to take courses in this, and courses in that, and courses in the other. Well, here I am at 65, and I can tell you I got that dream. I was able to go to school for the rest of my life, and it's called becoming a professor. And you have to teach the courses rather than take them, but you get to learn from your students. And they do all sorts of cool things, and you all teach us so much. That's why some days I pinch myself, and it's like, they pay me to do this? This is great. And because I also have this strong extension orientation, working with local communities across the state, across the nation, and around the world, I get to learn from them too. And it's just a thrill. It's an absolute thrill. So I hope you all will pepper me with questions, interrupt if you'd like, as I go through this presentation this evening. But I'm going to start with sustainability. So back in 2015, we did a national survey of local governments and asked them, what are you doing with respect to sustainability? And the answer is a little. And we were particularly interested if they were starting to think about environmental sustainability as a priority. And we were asking them what their goals were. Now, you know, local government is fiscally constrained, so local government is always primarily interested in economic development, because that's where the tax base comes from. And so no surprise on this survey that was about sustainability actions, their top priority was economic development. Only half of them said they had a priority on environmental protection. This was 2015. I think if we were to repeat the survey today, we would find a lot more than half think environmental protection is a priority. There hasn't been another survey, but I think if you just sort of read the newspaper and look around, you can say there's been some progress there. And only a quarter thought social equity was a priority. That has also increased, but not as much as we'd like, and I can show you some data on that coming up. But because environmental protection wasn't hitting so high, we also asked questions on the survey about disasters. And, you know, who has faced a disaster? How about a blizzard, Buffalo? Or a flood, or a wildfire, or a tornado, or the bad air quality that's coming tomorrow? Get out your N95 mask.
What's going on tomorrow?
The wind currents are changing, and the wildfires from Canada are going to bring us orange skies again.
Thank you.
Climate change is real, it's with us, and frankly, it's overwhelming us. Canada's been overwhelmed with this wildfire problem for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it's a global problem because we're feeling it too. What we wondered is, when governments face a disaster, does this cause them to think about climate change and planning and action to address it? And the answer is yes, a little. We're reactionary, you know, we react to the problem. We're not usually proactive in addressing, but it is one way to move. We also asked on the survey, what other kinds of factors are motivating your sustainability actions? And right up there at the top, fiscal savings. So economic development is always pushing itself up. You know, okay, can we save some money by doing this? But you also notice that you see right as number 2, the leadership of local officials. And then number 3 is external funding from the state or federal government. So what you don't see on this list as really pressuring them, and again, remember, this is from 2015, was pressure from residents, pressure from business and industry, desire to promote social equity. Those were not high motivators. Again, I think that's changed. Are you all sitting around saying you don't care about these issues and you don't care if your local government doesn't move on it? No, you're like seriously interested in these issues. And so I think, again, that's where we're seeing some movement. We were already seeing some leadership back in 2015. I think nowadays we're seeing a lot more pressure, not just social and political pressure, but actual environmental pressures that you can't ignore. Yes, sir?
When you looked at the potential for fiscal savings, did people think of it at all as cost avoidance? That if they plan for sustainability environmentally, they would lose less money in the future at a disaster?
You know, the early actions that we were seeing were things like literally replacing light bulbs. Easy, not that expensive, and you're going to get savings now and into the future. Disaster response, what we saw a lot of was actual increased cost, because we need to come together as multiple agencies in the community to plan for our disasters. Think of Hurricane Katrina, and local officials were scratching their head. It's like, why didn't these old people and these low-income people leave when we told them to? It's like, well, they don't have cars. And so local officials figured it out, that they needed to pay attention to the full range of their population and begin to coordinate to address that. And so that actually cost more money in the short term. But the other thing that was happening with this is that FEMA was requiring you to have a disaster plan if you want any of their disaster money. So you'll see later on that the plans that are most common are disaster plans. So there is a role for higher levels of government and sort of lighting the fire under us. One of the factors hindering sustainability, the most important one, was lack of money. And so they're thinking about things that they can self-finance, that they can do on their own, low-hanging fruit, start. Nothing breeds success like success. So start with something easy and celebrate the success, and then hopefully you'll take a bigger step the next time. We did see some state and federal funding restrictions. There's a lot of effort to reduce that. Staff capacity. This is something interesting. Right now we're in this stimulus moment with the American Rescue Plan. Back in 2011, we had the American Resource and Recovery Plan after the Great Recession. Many local governments use that money to hire a sustainability officer. So they have the capacity. And this is a person who knew they had to move quick because in a few years there won't be money. So if you don't want to lose your job, make yourself indispensable. And so lots of local governments got into the sustainability business with that little bit of extra money coming from the American Rescue Plan. But right now we're at another historic moment, which is well, it was called the Resource Recovery Plan. Now it's called the Rescue Plan. And this is really a historic investment by the federal government. We have these little balloons coming down with money, but the fact of the matter is that this money went to everybody. It went to every community, large and small, rural and urban, which is unusual. Usually we're dividing it off to different types of groups. And we did a survey at the national level with the International City County Management Association, ICMA, and discovered that most communities plan to use it on infrastructure, water, sewer, broadband. And equity was only for about 37%. And then we did a survey in New York State later, also in 2021, with the New York State Conference of Mayors, New York State Association of Counties, and the New York State City County Managers Association. And we found really similar results to what we had seen in the national survey, of focusing primarily on infrastructure and about a third focusing on equity. And one of the things that's interesting here is, if COVID-19 taught us anything, it was that structural inequities are not okay. And there was a lot of political movement with the Black Lives Matter movement to push back. And the American Rescue Plan said specifically that we would like to see transformational change directly addressing those most affected by the pandemic. And so what I've been doing with my students these last couple of years is trying to articulate an equity framework where local government actually sits. Because local government isn't your most progressive institution around. It's pragmatic, not necessarily progressive. And so when we think about equity, we can think about the redistributional aspect of equity. What are you doing? Where are you doing it? Are you targeting those neighborhoods and those populations that were most adversely affected by COVID-19? But there's also the procedural part of equity, which is the how. And some people will focus on an issue of more democracy, or maybe you need protest to get attention. And we discovered that communities that did more equity things were communities that also had Black Lives Matter protests. It matters. Protest works. Hit the streets. If that's what you need to do, do it, because it wakes people up to move. But what we're also seeing is the role of various partnerships, whether it's your community foundation or working with your schools and universities or your hospitals, your big anchor institutions, or nonprofit groups, that bringing together coalitions across agencies can also help address more creative approaches. And finally, there's this idea of epistemic justice, or conceptual change, like really rethinking how we think what is equitable, what we do. And this is where the opportunity for some kind of transformational thinking comes in. You know, and one area where we see this in COVID was with public health. America doesn't think that much about public health. Health is private. And let's take, for example, water. We don't believe in a human right to water in America. The UN has a human right to water, but the US doesn't sign on. And unlike most any other country in the world, we don't guarantee a minimum allotment of water. If you can't pay, we shut you off. It's a commodity. And during COVID-19, Detroit was like, no, we got 23,000 households cut off from water and we're telling people to wash their hands. Maybe we need to put a moratorium on our water shutoffs. 35 states followed suit in those early days of lockdown, those early months, and put moratoriums on water shutoffs. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, maybe we'll come out of this with a human right to water. No. 0 states have moratoriums on water shutoffs in America today. But for a moment, for actually about 6 months of a moment, we had 35 states with a moratorium. The federal government then created the low-income water program, which will sunset in '24. But we talked about the palimpsest, laying the layers. We're laying layers, right? A layer. Yes, ma'am.
So with the 35 states, did they have to actively rescind the initiative to have a moratorium on water shutoff, or did it sunset, or something else?
You know, that's a great question, and I know they're gone. I don't know how they disappeared. In tracking them, talk about research with community groups, Food and Water Watch was tracking this, and they have like 40,000 members, and people were sending them tweets from the governor. The governor has tweeted that there'll be a moratorium. And then what you had in some cases is the legislature following suit, or in Michigan, the legislature took it away and then brought it back. And so you'll see states with and without moratoria coming in and out. And the exact process by which it came into being could be as informal as tweet, as formal as a law. And then how it goes away could be as formal as a court case or a legislature changing its mind or just a sunset. So there's a lot of variety. The problem in the US, you want to study local government in the US? You got 50 different state systems. So it's really hard to know what's going on here because there's so much diversity. But it was this moment, and that's what excited me, is the possibility of something transformational. And like I said, the key thing that we're discovering in the case studies that we're doing with my students is this procedural layer is where the rubber hits the road. It's where the creative stuff happens. And so paying attention to the how is really important, because it gives you clues on how to change the what, and how to change the where, and how to change the why. But in the how seems to be where we do our most learning. So to give an example, broadband. Yeah, this is the craziest thing. Broadband is not a utility. Hello? Like, why isn't broadband a utility? Well, political interests have a reason for broadband not being a utility. But in COVID, we all realized when everything moved online, you can't participate in society. You can't go to school, you can't go to the doctor, you can't go to the bank, you can't do anything without broadband. And so this horrible digital divide, which we've been living with for 40 years, all of a sudden became a political priority. And local governments across the country and state governments are working on addressing this, because the market's gone where it wants to go, and it's left behind me. I live on a farm outside of Ithaca. It's left behind a lot of lower income neighborhoods and cities where there's not enough profit to justify serving. And so this is where government sets in to fix it. And just here in Niagara and Orleans County, there you're seeing local government invest in expanding broadband. But we need to think about access, like building the lines. Then we need to think about affordability, being able to connect to that line that's going in front of your house. And then we need to think about adoption, actually teaching people how to use devices that connect to the internet. And so here we see the example of the multi-agency partnership, because United Way took a lead on adoption and training. So it's a comprehensive approach, and it's pretty exciting, and these are happening all over the country. Water is another area where we're seeing a lot of work with the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And for example, Buffalo is doing a major lead pipe replacement program. You know, the problem of being in an old city is you've got pipes that are 100 years old, and they need to be replaced. And of course now with recognition of lead and your future generations poisoned by lead, you have really got to start working on this problem, and it's expensive. And so you need cross-agency collaboration to make it happen. And what happened, we were looking at the communities that moved first, and they had plans sitting on the shelf that they could activate when the money started raining down. So they could move more quickly. They didn't have to start with a planning process. They already had a plan that they could move with. And they looked at multiple benefits to motivate multiple actors to come to the table and play. And that's another key theme, is figuring out who are the different agencies and people who might play with you, and how do you get them all to come together? So, you know, we had the really horrible situation in Flint where they poisoned a generation. The public sector did this. The water system was publicly owned. An emergency manager decided to save a few $1 million in the short term at a great expense for the long term and a huge blow to public health. And there's a group of scholars who think that Detroit and Flint are examples of the future city. And they call it the austerity machine, where local leaders and business elites and state policymakers come together to cut services and hurt residents. And actually, under Governor Snyder in Michigan and these emergency managers who were narrowly focused on a financial bottom line and not a community well-being bottom line, you saw some really bad decisions get made. But the emergency manager program, even in Michigan, died after about 12 of them were assigned, and almost always to low-income and African-American communities. So there's a race piece to this and a poverty piece to this as well. And I was really worried that Detroit and Flint were coming to New York because the state, in an effort to solve its budget crisis, was cutting aid to local governments, and we got a tax cap put in on us. And I'm like, oh my goodness, is austerity coming to us? And as I met with local officials, it just didn't ring true. It's like, yeah, we're under fiscal stress, that's right, but we're going to be pragmatic. We live here too. We want communities that are good places for us to live. And we're actually more interested in building coalitions of civic and business and government to help make our community a better place. And this is the old theory, was to call those groups a growth coalition. Everybody benefits from growth, and so they go for growth. They don't necessarily care about equity, but at least they care about growth. But this idea of austerity as a coalition promoting austerity, that didn't ring too true with people. The geographers love it. There are tons of articles in the literature about austerity coalitions and the austerity city and the predatory city. I just have trouble finding that city. You found it in Detroit when an emergency manager was in charge. Even the judge, when they did the bankruptcy, said, no, labor has a right to a pension. Citizens have a right to services, and creditors have a right to get paid, but they're not the primary right. We're going to balance them with workers, residents, and financial interest. Everybody's taking a hit, and everybody's still going to get something at the end of the day. So we did a survey in New York State in 2017 looking at fiscal stress, and we had there are a ton of local governments in New York State. There's like 1,600 of them. And we had over 900 of them answer this survey. Cities, counties, towns, villages. And the white spots on the map are the non-respondents. So it was a pretty good geographically distributed sample. And we asked them, what are your sources of local stress, fiscal stress, and they blamed the state. Stagnant state aid, which at that time was very true. State mandates, it's great. Set up at the state level and make rules and then say, local government, you can pay for it. We'll make another rule and local government can pay for it. So the state looks good and the local government has to eat it. And then the property tax cap that got passed in 2011 and really came into effect in 2012. New York was late to the game. There's 47 states that have tax caps, and New York is one of the latest ones. They don't work. They're not good policy, but they're politically really popular, and so the governor then, which was Cuomo, put one in place. Then you see things like personnel costs. Local government's service organization, 80% of its costs are personnel. People's salaries, and then people's benefits. You also see issues of aging infrastructure and aging population. We're an old state. This is a reality. We just need to deal with it, but it's not cheap. And further down, you see the issue of tax-exempt properties. And this is going to come up again. What are the biggest industries in Buffalo? Eds and meds. Universities, hospitals. Do they pay taxes? Nope. Think back. 50 years. What were the biggest industries of Buffalo?
Steel.
Steel, power, cars. Did they pay taxes? You bet you they did. So the whole model of how we finance our local governments was based on industry that creates jobs and pays taxes to pay for the services the local government provides. But now we have industry, education and medical, eds and meds, that are often nonprofit and do not pay any taxes. And so your fiscal model for running a city doesn't quite work anymore. And so we looked at, what are the pressures causing fiscal stress in local governments across New York State? Well, we have the state policy, the mandates, and the reduced aid. That's giving you pressure from one side. You have the economy with all this tax-exempt land. Anybody know what percentage of land in Erie County or Buffalo is tax-exempt? Go look it up. I'll bet you it's 40 to 50%. It's a lot. Okay, we got a lot of students here from Ithaca. Cornell owns 40% of the land in Ithaca, and they don't pay taxes. When you want to know why there's potholes, think about it. Then you've got economic development challenges. You've had a city like this one that's moved from, that's now called a Rust Belt city, and it's got its renaissance coming from education and medical institutions. And then you've got this aging infrastructure. And so you need to address these problems. And then you got demography, which I haven't talked that much about yet, but that'll be the last part of my talk, with the issue of poverty. What percentage of children are in poverty in this city? No. Closer to 50.
Really?
Right? That's not okay, folks. In fact, that's obscene. And 50% poverty rates are pretty close to it, or what you see in the upstate cities of Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse. This is not okay. This is structural, and this needs to be fixed. And we can do it. We've also aging. And if you're an aging society that's not investing in your children, you are in big trouble. I mean, that's just dumb. And so we need to fix it. But local government is sitting here, I think of it as like a tightening vice. Oh, what is it, where they have the box and the magician puts the sword through this way and the sword through that way. And you're like wondering how is the guy in the middle. Well, that's what local government feels like. We need to sort of bust out of that box. Yes, sir?
Isn't there a problem because cities in New York State cannot expand, where there are other states like Texas and California that can just annex suburbs, and all of a sudden their tax base becomes much larger, their problems are no longer so super localized, etc.?
You have named something called the Elastic City. And the former mayor of Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is an elastic city, wrote a book, and the title is great. Come up with good titles, they really help. The Elastic City. The city expands to consolidate its suburbs, and so you're expanding your tax base, and you are spreading your social challenges across a broader environment. So you'll have, your averages will look better, right? Your high school graduations will look better, rates will look better because you're looking at a larger unit. North Carolina cities can also annex. New York State takes an act of the state legislature to allow us to expand. And guess what? All those other legislators who aren't from here are going to vote against it. Because suburbs benefit from free riding on city services. We did a project looking at upstate cities with my students a bunch of years ago, and we drew GIS maps by tax base, by poverty, by income. And you always saw this hole in the city. It's like a donut, and the big greasy donut with all the wealth sitting in that circle around. And so yes, any kind of tax-based sharing or regionalism could help politically. It's almost a non-starter, but there are states who do it. So it's not impossible, it's just something we don't seem to do in this state. Yes, ma'am, sorry.
So no worries. So
is it essentially too late for New York State or like smaller cities within it to essentially profit off of like a demographic dividend? Or has that, for example, in Buffalo, like, has that already happened, like the steel and industry era from before?
So what's our demographic dividend?
Oh, it's the idea that like if there's a smaller number of like dependents on both sides of the population pyramid, there's like a larger working age population, then if you invest in like education and economy, then the economy can experience like financial success during that time. But it can only last for a certain time before people like start aging out of that like working age population.
So even though the population pyramid is starting to go from this to this, you still have the majority of your people in your working age group. And the concern was over time, we're going to get more people in the older age group while we're getting fewer people in the younger age group. And the old word for older adults and children was dependent population, with the idea that they're economically dependent because they're not economically productive, and they're dependent upon that working age group. And the concern is that maybe we should change our word and not think of these people as economically unproductive and dependent, because they're becoming a larger percentage of the population and will be that for decades to come. So the demographic dividend is the part I'm having trouble understanding exactly what you mean, because we're sort of moving to the era where we're going to have a larger percentage of older adults, but a smaller percentage of children because people aren't having as many children. So the investment in children is important. The investment in continuing education for your current working age population is important, because you want these people to be able to have career mobility and to become more productive. And then thinking about education for older adults, because, I mean, I'm 65. I could live to be 100. That's 35 years. Do you really want to be retired for 35 years? Or do you want to do something else, right? And so I think we really need to rethink what this means. It used to be, my dad died when he was 62. You know, I have the anticipation of potentially living a whole lot longer. So that really changes up, you know, how you think about things. But I want to go back to the tax cap. This is really, we'll get to demography again in another minute. I want to go back to the tax cap because this was a really political win for Governor Cuomo. Remember, he stood in front of the bird bath in front of his mom's house down in Queens and said every man's house is his castle. And taxes, property taxes, are causing us to lose our castle. Some of y'all probably remember that ad. And of course, the problem is local governments, inefficient local governments who spend too much and tax too much. When a lot of those taxes, and we just lost our microphone.
Yeah.
It just went out.
Yeah.
A lot of our local governments, the counties will tell you that 100% of their property tax base is used up paying for state mandates.
Wow.
So it is an issue. And should I just keep talking? Can you still hear me there? Because I know you're taping for the thing. I'll just, you know, when we're in drama, everything matters, right? Project your voice. So here we go. What we were
down to get a new battery.
Yeah, that's probably the case. But what we did in the survey is we asked local governments what are the 38% of the local governments overrode the tax cap in the first years when it was in place. And when we asked them why, they said to maintain services or to invest in longer-term infrastructure. And then there was a fair little bit around uncertainty because there was a lot of complexity and confusion in how to do these tax caps. Thank you. And so some of them just did it to be safe because they weren't sure how the comptroller's office was going to calculate it, because it was a, you know, government can't do anything simple, right? It was this super complex formula that even I had trouble understanding. So it's reasonable to think that people would be careful. But what I'm worried about with the tax cap, and I thought that Kathy's husband Sean was going to be here. Since he's a state legislature, I want him to fix this. And And my concern is that if the budget areas most affected by your tax cap are your infrastructure investments and your long-term planning, you're kind of setting yourself up for a really bad future. And so the idea is that you're going to underinvest because you can always delay fixing the pipes till tomorrow. But my friends, the pipe fixing day is now. We have left that till tomorrow for too many decades, and the time to fix it is now. And so if you underinvest, you're going to get economic decline, not economic growth, and then that's going to lead to tax base erosion, and it's just going to take you in a vicious cycle downward. And that's what I don't want this state to do to our upstate cities. By the way, how many of you are from New York City? New York City is exempt from the tax cap. It's the only city in the state of New York that does not have to live under the tax cap, because the state is smart enough, there we go, to figure out that you don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. But I guess Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse and Albany and Binghamton don't lay golden eggs anymore. But they still matter. And that's why I'd like to see a reform of the tax cap. So we asked local officials, if you were to reform it, what would you like to see? Here's the legislative agenda. Please take this home to your representatives in Albany. Exempt capital expenditures. Duh, right? They have this growth factor at 2% or 0. 2% inflation was if inflation was 2%, or 0 if it wasn't. Well, now we've got inflation at what, 7%? This is really going to start to hurt big time in the next year. We need to fix this next legislative session, because the pain of this is really going to start to kick in. Exempt emergency and natural disaster expenditures. Of course. But the legislature in its wisdom did not exempt these. Exempt pension payments, because those are set by the state, you have to pay them. Exempt special districts. So what a lot of local governments did is they created special districts for water, for sewer, for economic development, where you pay extra tax but you get extra service. Well, those count against the city or the county's overall tax levy. Thank you. I appreciate that. The man in the audience says, oh, stupid. Exempt pilots, include pilots in the growth factor. These are payments in lieu of taxes. And include tax-exempt land in your growth factor, because so much of our land is tax-exempt. So anyway, that's a legislative agenda for somebody else, but this is what local officials told us, and I think they make a lot of sense. So now let's get back to the question of demography and population aging. Now, demographers like to say, demography is destiny. Like the world's going to end, and whatever your population pyramid looks like, you're just kind of stuck. And from a people perspective, that's true, right? This is how many people exist and are alive, and this is true. But what kind of destiny do you want? Because we can change it up. We can think about where we want to go. And New York State has declared itself to be an age-friendly state, which means an old age-friendly state, by the way. And I think it should also be a child-friendly state, because I think those two go together. And if you take this all-ages approach, you can think about your planning, you can think about the physical design of your communities. I'm in a department of planning, after all, so we have to think about physical design. You can think about services. You can think about participation, because we know that really makes a difference. And maybe we can use this to get to a common vision that isn't old versus young, but it's all of us in it together. And maybe we can create better communities. That's my dream. And it's what I've been working on for the last, I don't know, decade or so. And one of the things that we found interesting is we went and looked at UNICEF, which has a Child-Friendly Cities Initiative. And then we looked at World Health Organization, which has an Age-Friendly Cities Initiative, which typically means old age. And you look at the things they say that you should have, and they're remarkably similar. The top group is more about physical things, services, water, streets, housing, transportation. And the bottom things in blue are more about social things, civic participation, family support, respect, because these are the motors, these are the how, and the top four are the what. right? But actually participation itself is a what. It's a what we spend a lot of time learning about how to do. And so the AARP decided to develop a livability index measuring these elements for every zip code in America. Take a look at this livability index, aarp.org, stick in your zip code and it'll give you your number. Now, they're using like 54 indicators for these 7 domains that are indicators where they could find data. And y'all know data is not always all that good, particularly not all the way down to the zip code effort. But it was an effort. And so I plugged in Erie County. Erie County gets a 57. Now, in the academy, a 57 means you flunked. But in this world, 57 is in the top half of communities in America. So we got a long way to go. Erie County is in the top half. Congratulations. Now let's get you to a B or a C or an A. And when you look across these domains, you see that Erie County really needs to do a lot more work, according to this, in housing and engagement particularly. And the idea was, you know, when you have the 10 best cities to live in or whatever, AARP was hoping that cities would start to compete with each other to look better on the livability index. I don't think it's quite had that effect, but we still thought it was interesting to take a look at that, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. But the American Planning Association has come up with an aging and community policy guide, and it takes these domains and says, okay, with housing, you need a variety of types. You have a whole lot of single-person households, not just at your age, students, but at my age. And so what does it mean to create a lot of single-person-sized housing, while at the same time still building enough bedrooms for people who are having children? Many communities still have sexist family definitions that say that more than 3 women living together in a house is against the zoning code. Does anyone know why?
Does that count as a brothel?
Yes, yes. More than 3 women living together must be a brothel. We don't want to allow brothels.
Seriously?
I kid you not. We did a survey of planners to find out how many communities still had these old family definitions on the books, and many do. Oh, my Ithaca folks, how many of you try to live in Cayuga Heights? And the rule there is no more than 3 unrelated people living in the same house, because we want to preserve that nice single-family neighborhood within walking distance of Cornell University. So, it is not planners' business to regulate family definitions. That day is over. Those laws still sit on the books because laws have a habit of getting written and never getting taken off. So if you find they're still in your community, get rid of them. Land use. We used to promote segregated land use. Industrial, commercial, residential. Now we're realizing that we want to bring them together so that you can have shorter commutes to work, you can have mixed use and services near where you live. Commuting. When I was in school, they said commuting is called journey to work. What about journey to the doctor's office, or journey to school, or journey to the grocery store? And so transportation has had a revolution, and it now calls it mobility. Where is it that you need to go, and how does our transportation system help you get there? Which is a real shift in paradigm. On economic well-being, we have this history of saying the economy is the traded economy, manufacturing, agriculture, mining, maybe a little bit of financial services, but things like locally serving services like childcare don't count. Literally don't count. They're not included in the count. We included household labor in the U.S. Census up until 1900. We were subsistence agriculture, so you counted household labor. They stopped counting it after 1900. Yes.
Any particular reason why that particular year? Was there something going on? Or did it just sort of reach some critical mass in terms of what people...
I think it was called industrialization, and we're starting to think more about factories as what drives the economy rather than farms. But there's another story that my husband Jim uncovered, which was Simon Kuznets, after the Great Depression, got the Nobel Prize in economics for coming up with the measure of GDP. And Simon, in his sexist perspective, decided not to count household labor or any non-traded aspects of the economy. And Margaret Reed, who was a feminist economist of the time, and back in those days women weren't allowed in men's PhD programs in economics. That's why we had home economics as schools for women, like human ecology today at Cornell. And anyway, Margaret Reed had her PhD in economics, and she said, hey, Simon, you need to count the real economy, and that includes the non-traded portions. And Simon said no, and Simon won, and the Nobel Prize Committee glorified that. And today we have the vestige of this, like a tree left standing doesn't contribute to the economy, but a tree cut down has value. And we're cutting down the Amazon rainforest. You know, so from an environmental perspective, from a care perspective, this misguided notion of how to count the economy has cost us a lot. And economists are now working very heavily to figure out how to count the uncounted. And one of the things we've been doing is counting the care sector, which is something that the Buffalo Group has been doing as well. We need to give a lot more attention to community assets, both formal and informal services, and look more at participation across age, race, class, and gender, because participation makes the difference. When we do our studies looking at which communities are more age-friendly, we discover those are communities where local leadership and engagement drive a better planning process, which then drives a better built environment, more housing choices, and more services. So it's a happy story. Leadership, participation, planning. They'll get you where you want to go. But are we planning? Well, I told you earlier on, disaster plans are the most common. We got those. About 91% of the communities responding to this national survey said, yeah, we have a disaster plan. But only 52% have an economic development plan. And are these plans looking at the needs of families with children or of seniors? And the answer is economic development plans are least likely to consider the needs of seniors and children. And again, it might be a vestige of calling this middle age group economically productive and the other two age groups dependent, therefore they're not relevant for economic development planning. That's entirely possible. We're seeing more work in transportation, and this again is partly due to federal policy. If you have a transit system, you also need to have a para-transit system, so it forces transportation planners to think. But on economic development, which I know is where a lot of the high road students are active, I want to just let you know that Buffalo has been one of the leaders. Way back in 2006, Eugene Flarin led the effort on the Buffalo Child Care Means Business Report, which was one of about 90 state and local teams across the country that worked on looking at the economic impact of childcare. So the sector that Simon Kuznets told us did not count, we have been counting it using their same techniques. And they're like, oh wow, it's bigger than we thought. And then back during COVID, when childcare really struggled and essential workers couldn't get to work because they didn't have adequate childcare, Erie County once again took the lead, looking at wages, looking at supply, and that work is yielding fruit in terms of improved state policy. So if you don't think local action matters, just look at what happens here in Buffalo and the difference that it was able to make in not only local policy, but also state policy. Childcare is a critical social infrastructure, and I would argue that elder care is also going to be a critical social infrastructure because we're old for a lot more years than we're young. And those jobs are bad jobs.
Yeah.
They're low pay, they're hard work, and you aren't going to substitute a machine for them.
Right.
So they're not going to go away. They're actually growing labor sectors in the economy, but they're bad jobs. So we need to figure out how to make them better jobs because the demand for care workers is only going to increase. And it has the positive effect of human development for children, but it also helps parents go to work. And even if you're dealing with your mother, right? Having good care still helps you go to work, right? It works for the kid and it works for grandma too. And increasingly the regional economy is recognizing that this is an important source of small business and employment, and it's part of the social infrastructure for the whole rest of the economy. And in fact, it's what the economy is based on. Nancy Folbre, who's a famous feminist economist, wrote a book called The Invisible Heart. If y'all remember, Adam Smith talked about the invisible hand that makes the market work.
Yep.
And Nancy goes, no, the invisible heart is what creates that foundation of social infrastructure, of care infrastructure, on which all the rest of the economy is built. And we need to start paying attention to it. So economic development policy, you can think of it as a building with 3 columns. And we have our export column, which is what was privileged in Simon Kuznets' world, the traded stuff. Then we have the productivity column, land, labor, capital, new technology. And then we have the sustainability column that's been ignored until the last couple of decades. And that's where we see human development, environment, quality of life. And so instead of being a building with a good roof on it, it's actually had a roof that's been sagging down, slanting, privileging the export, paying a little bit of attention to productivity, and the least attention to sustainability. That cannot hold. We have got to raise the roof on the sustainability column. And I think that's what a lot of you are doing this summer in your High Road fellowships. And I'll just end with my last slide. This is me when I was mid-30s, 2 little kids, and a grandmother in her 90s. This is why we do this work. Because we want to build a community that's good for all of us. Children and older adults will suffer the most tomorrow when the air quality is dangerous. They're what we call sensitive receptors. Children and older adults need care work. They need a care workforce that is well paid and well trained because they're less able to express their own needs, some of them, particularly when you're at the frail ends of that. As you're seeing here, you're seeing the 2 frail ends. And so it is critically important that we change the way we think about the economy. It's been 100 years since Simon Kuznets was awarded the Nobel Prize for a wrong way of thinking. I think it's time to change. And I look forward to you all doing it. Thank you.